Hello and well met. This is Layron with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today I'm going to be starting a new series for converting modules for the Fantasy Grounds virtual tabletop platform. I'm going to convert the Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth for the D&D 5e rule set. We're going to use the original PDF. I also have a guide here that I got off the DM's Guild. That is essentially kind of giving me some ideas on how to convert it. I may or may not use this tool depending on how I plan to execute the work. So I might just do my own thing. We're going to go over the list of tools, materials, planning, that sort of stuff in this first episode. It will get better as it progresses, but for now, let's talk about the tools. We're going to dive right in and let's kind of discuss the tools that we have here. So basically what I had done is did a little planning, a little research, and if you don't know already, Wizards of the Coast is going to release their own version of a tournament version of this adventure. So I'm going to actually create the full adventure in Fantasy Grounds. I'm not sure what the Wizards of the Coast plans are, maybe a shorter version of it. It does kind of cut out some of the other stuff in the beginning of the adventure, but I think that I would prefer to have it the whole thing, and then I can decide how I want to chop it up as a game master. So that's one of the benefits of doing your own conversions, is that you have that opportunity and that flexibility to change whatever it is you need to get your product converted. So that's one of the things that is kind of important to converting this products, is kind of understanding the scope of what you're trying to do, and also understanding the process that's involved with doing conversions. There are lots of different ways to do it. This can apply to any rule set. Doesn't have to be D&D. I'm just doing Dungeons and Dragons because I happen to know it the best. But this process would be very much the same almost all the way through the series. So if you're going to do some Pathfinder work or one of the other rule sets, this will be very similar. I'm going to focus more on the things that are similar in Fantasy Grounds, not so much the different. And the thing about this is that I'm going to be doing mostly the campaign work, so there's not going to be a whole lot of player-facing content. So if you're looking to make like races, backgrounds, classes, subclass, subrace, those sort of things, we're not going to have a whole lot of that in here because of the nature of the conversion. So I have an actual version of this Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth. So I got that on the DM's Guild. I got it on sale, as a matter of fact. It just recently went on sale. But this is the original PDF paperback version from the. This one was printed in '82. So this is one of those classic adventures. And basically, I'm going to be taking this information out of here and doing some copying and pasting, and also working with text. Going to be taking the images. There's all kinds of things that go into doing a conversion. On top of that, you're not only doing a copy and paste thing, but you're also converting it from 1st edition to 5th edition. So that's a little bit different there. So that's also the first thing I'm probably going to focus on, is doing the conversion from the actual rules, changing the 1st edition rules over to 5th edition. And like I said, this guide here, this conversion guide, kind of does most of the work for you. But I don't know if I'm going to actually use this stuff. I have to go through it and kind of figure it out. Hey, started a little early. Yeah, I did. Sorry. I wanted to make sure that the audio was working. So, and sometimes the stream doesn't kick off. So I'd rather be a little early than not at all or late. So sorry about that. But basically, all I'm going to be doing is going over the tools, the setup, that sort of thing. I want it to, I can't reiterate how important this part is of your actual project. So there are a few different things you got to keep in mind: your scope of what you're doing and how you want your workflow. So you could just be doing minor edits to a module, which is probably what most of us do. You could be doing a conversion for an official product, or you could be doing a whole homebrew world from scratch. So it kind of depends on your scope of what you're trying to do in Fantasy Grounds. But nonetheless, we're going to go over that We're going to go over the tools and that sort of thing. So let's talk about gathering up the resources. So it's very important to gather that. So I got these 2 PDFs from the DMs Guild. You could source your content from wherever you need to. Maybe you own some PDFs already, but nonetheless, this is just the starting point, and you're going to take a look through those and see kind of what the type of content is in there. So I'm definitely going to be dealing with text and images. So we'll talk about the tools that are involved with that. And some rule sets have parsing ability or tools to import content. Some don't. So it just depends on what rule set you're using and the capabilities of such rule set. But honestly, this is a lot of copying and pasting, and it's a lot of time put into it. So why would you do this? So some people don't like paying the full price of a module. You're going to pay anywhere from $20 to $50 depending on what it is. So in this case, I didn't want to wait for Wizards of the Coast to come out with theirs and then wait for Smiteworks to publish it. And they're usually pretty on the spot. But I kind of wanted to do my own thing with it. And being this is a classic adventure, kind of wanted to have that flexibility of putting together the way I want to and focusing on the stuff that I think is important for my particular campaign. And when you're doing this for yourself and you don't have an audience or maybe it's just your table, you kind of have more flexibility in that regard. If I was doing this for Smiteworks, I'd be following it a lot closer to how the module's laid out. I don't think I would deviate too much. The other thing is once you go through this, you're going to start thinking about what tools you're going to need, those sorts of things. So for the time being, I've got a couple PDFs, and then I also found some maps. Now this map here is pretty big. So when I mean big, I mean like dimensionally. This is bigger than 4K, but it is a nice map. So I'm trying to convert these down, and I'll go through that process when we cover images of maps. But essentially, this is one of the resources that I got. I got this off of ArtStation, and these are some pretty decent looking maps. There are some other attempts at this on the DMs Guild. So if you go on the DMs Guild, you'll find other artists that have made digital maps that are more conducive to virtual tabletops and such. So I think I might use these maps here. I kind of already have those. These were free, by the way. If you're just using them for your own personal use, they give you there's a end user license agreement, so you're not on the hook for paying any gratuities and those sort of things. But nonetheless, this is just an example of collecting the content that you need to convert. So you need images, text. It just depends. Some rule sets only have a few images. You don't need to get a bunch of stuff, but in a lot of cases, D&D or any like Pathfinder and those sorts of rule sets, they do have images, and the variation in quality is something you got to think about because not all PDFs convert well into Fantasy Grounds or any virtual tabletop. A lot of times the maps are not set up for virtual tabletop. So you'll find that as you're converting that it can be real annoying. So I went and sourced out some maps that are already built. I don't want to spend the time building them in Fantasy Grounds, although you could. You could take a black and white image and overlay it, that sort of thing. But I think the biggest thing is collecting all of your artwork, organizing it, getting all your materials, your sources. That's probably your beginning start point when you're actually getting ready to do a conversion. And then you're going to do like an outline or some sort of methodology to your madness. So I kind of have an idea of what I want to work with first. And I usually go with the more challenging, time-consuming stuff. So obviously, maps and images are going to take time. So I usually tackle those in the beginning or near the beginning. I also do all the NPCs because that's generally a lot of work. And then the items. So those are probably the worst case scenario in regards to time, is to actually do the conversion work. And to take that information and all that stuff and compile it together, it takes some time. So when you're making your own content, you're kind of trading time for cost. So you can just wait conveniently for the product to come out from Wizards of the Coast. But lately, the last, I want to say, couple years, I've been pretty disappointed with a lot of the releases that have come out from Wizards of the Coast. So I prefer to do my own, and I only have that luxury because I've spent time with Fantasy Grounds and got to know how to use it a little bit and learning the tools that go into it. And that's kind of the time sink. So if you've never done a conversion before, I recommend that you get used to the tools and kind of get used to Fantasy Grounds and then start your project. So whenever you start a new project in Fantasy Grounds, you want to take and go into Fantasy Grounds itself, and you want to take and grab, just create a new campaign. So this is very critical. I don't know if you guys have done any kind of conversion work, but you want to select your rule set first. And in this case, I'm going to give it, I'll just say Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth. And then underscore, I'm going to put work. So this is going to be a work folder. So when I make this campaign, this is only going to be to build the content. You don't normally want to build as you're playing inside the same campaign. There are a couple reasons for that. One of them being that it can get confusing. And when you make edits in your live game and you try to export it, and then if you load that into the same game you're playing in, that really throws everything off. It actually will load the older content. So when you make changes and you're trying to see that in the same campaign, it'll show the older stuff. It won't show the new revisions. So it can get really convoluted. So make a separate campaign for your work. That's probably the best advice you're going to get out of this particular episode, other than resources and tools, is to make a separate campaign. The other thing is, since I'm not sharing this with anyone, nor am I going to be online with it anytime soon, I'm going to select LAN, which is just my local area network. No one's going to be connecting to it, so I don't need to worry about that. And then if I need any of these other properties in here, I would load those. But in this case, since it's just a build campaign, I don't really tend to put any extensions. I'll do one for the font, but all the rest of this I probably don't need, because this is all gameplay stuff and themes and that sort of thing. So keep your load down and just use the bare minimum. You know, if you need a different theme, that's fine. So I might use like the leather theme since I'm so used to it. But other than that, that's the only extensions I'm going to be using in this particular build. I don't want a bunch of other stuff in there because I don't need it right now. If I want to use it, I will export the module, test it in a different instance or a different campaign, so that I can check out any changes or revisions that I've made. But in this case, I don't need any extensions. I'm only loading the font one for visibility reasons, and I'm only loading this theme for the leather because I'm used to it and it's kind of nice on my eyes. It's not too bright, it's not too dark. So that's the only reason. So I have the D&D 5e rule set in this case. I have my work folder, which is basically the campaign folder for working on this content, and then a couple minor extensions that shouldn't impact anything I'm doing inside of the campaign. So I'm going to go ahead and hit start. So this is my starting point. I make my own work campaign. You can work on several different campaigns in the work folder, but generally speaking, if you're going to have a big project, I normally have a separate campaign for every project. That way you don't get mixed up or, cross-contaminated. It could be a campaign that you're running, so you can probably do everything in one separate campaign. That's your work campaign folder. But I wouldn't do it in my live game. And that's something you'll run across when you first start using Fantasy Grounds. If you're going to make a couple edits here and there, no big deal. But if you're going to build content like character-facing stuff and big elaborate maps and tables and all that stuff, you're probably eventually going to want to put it in another campaign. So save yourself some work, make an extra campaign, and then actually just build in it and then export as you go. That way the content you have is fresh. Also, don't make 20 different copies of it in your campaign folder. You only need the latest one. If you want to archive the older ones, that's fine, but put them in a different folder or in a subfolder so Fantasy Grounds doesn't see it. Because again, it will load the oldest one. So even if you export 6 different copies of it and you rename it, it still goes by the XML inside the file. So you got to be careful with that. So the first thing I'm going to do here is get my desktop environment set up. I don't have to do a lot of changes here. So I don't want this to pop up again. So show on load is going to be off. I'm going to hit next. I might load the SRD or a core book. I don't need all my library for this. So I'm just going to load the SRD. If you have a different rule set, like Pathfinder, some of them have like a basic rule set. I might load that for reference and for formatting, but generally speaking, I don't load any of the official content. Normally, I don't, unless I need something specific. And then that's pretty much it for that. And then if I wanted to load any other modules, I could from the modules list, but I don't need to. So I hit next, and then I'm going to go to options, and I'm going to finish this out. So next time I come into this table, it's not going to load that setup. One other thing I think that would be helpful is if you're going to do a lot of work, enable this new feature, desktop restore windows on start. So if you want all your work to pop back up where you left off before, then you go ahead and change that to on. So the next time you come back into this campaign, all your windows will pop back up, provided you leave them open. So that's pretty much all I need here. I'm not going to use the audio, the sound, so I can disable that. I don't need to mess around too much with anything else because I'm not playing, so I don't need to worry about that. Maybe I might clear this background decal because I get distracted easily, so I cleared that out. That's just a idiosyncrasy that I have. I kind of just want to keep a clean slate is kind of what I'm getting at. I don't need to change the dice, none of that. Okay, the main thing that I do need to focus on is over here on the right, the campaign assets, and then my library, which is going to have your pictures and stuff in it. Those are probably the most important aspects of this campaign building process. If I was going to make character stuff, that would be background, classes, feats, races, skills, and spells. But this is actually going to be campaign content. So if you're going to build a module that has character creation stuff in it, you'll have to include that as well. And I will go over that at some point at the end of the series. So I'm looking at about 8 to 10 different videos going forward. So every Friday around this time, I'm going to work on a different aspect of the game. So the next one, I'll probably do NPCs. And we'll talk about the tools. We'll talk about the formatting. I mean, I've done a lot of videos on that. The reason I'm revisiting this is because the series I did before was like 1.5 years, so it's been a little bit. And what I'm hoping is that some of the new features in Fantasy Grounds will drop as this series goes on. So hopefully sooner than later, so I don't have to go back and redo something. But I think working on NPCs, items, and the images and such is going to be enough work, and I don't have to worry too much about the new features. So I don't think it's going to break my work. But that is something you got to consider. When you're in the middle of a big project, you may not want to update Fantasy Grounds. So if you have extensions or you're working on something that's really important, honestly, I would not update Fantasy Grounds. I wouldn't. I would wait till the project's done and then update it, because you could change some things that are fundamentally different, and that could break your work, and that'll really piss you off. So you got to be careful with that. I'd honestly have a separate computer that I work on that just has that kind of stuff on it, because if it's that important to you, then you're going to take a risk of breaking your content. Doesn't happen very often, but it can. Something can change, and it might be hard to recover. So I wouldn't update Fantasy Grounds if you're in the middle of a big project. I just don't do it. Get a separate computer if you can and work on it separately from your play, because that's really something that really irk you. The other thing is to consider different resources. So there's lots of resources out there for individuals who want to get into Fantasy Grounds. And the first one I'm going to start with is probably the most important one that I think is the Fantasy Grounds Atlassian. This is the product guidelines. So this talks about what size the images should be. And these are recommendations. You don't have to do it exactly like they say, but I do recommend that you keep your images under 4K. And then also their file sizes are recommended roughly around 2 megs for a static image and 10 megs for animated. So that could be something that you kind of use as your rule of thumb when you're creating content. For regular images, they're recommending WebP, and the reason for that is because it takes less footprint on your hard drive, so less room on your hard drive, and the transfer time takes less when you're going from your player to your table back and forth. And also, when you do your Fantasy Grounds updates, if you've got a large adventure and they have it on the store, it's going to take a while to download that if it's a bunch of high quality images. So they went to compressing it so you don't really lose any quality, and it's really a really high compression ratio. I think it's like if you took a 1 megabyte file and you compress it to, if it was PNG or something like that, you compress it to WebP, it's going to be like a quarter of that size. It's pretty amazing. So they talk about the sizes for the images, brushes, stamps, maps, handouts, and tokens. So this is a good guide. And this will tell you basically what sizes they should be within the umbrella of making stuff for Fantasy Grounds. You especially want to pay attention to this if you're going to be doing official conversions. So this is just kind of a guideline for it if you're making it for yourself. But keep in mind that the larger the images dimensionally, the tougher it is on a lot of people's tables. It may work great on your computer, but when you go to share that out with different people have different types of internet. So that's something to keep in mind. And there's some guidelines on how to assemble everything. There's some links to tools on the Forge. So you have the conversion checker, you have the token XY, and then you have the Fantasy Grounds Forge properties inspector. So these are just different things that you'll need if you're going to do official conversions. And also, if you want to get started, you get a hold of developer relations. And then once you get going on something, then James will get a hold of you and he'll get you set up. You get an account and all that stuff. And then sometimes you have to sign up to complete the product and get the developer portal access. And from there, you can get a list of things that need to be adapted. Or maybe one of the publishers has reached out to you personally, and then they need to work that out with SmiteWorks in regards to percentages and all that sort of thing. Keep in mind copyright. So if you're going to make this for yourself, you're probably okay. But if you're going to distribute this or sell it on the DMs Guild, you got to have that copyright stuff in mind. So generally speaking, if it's only Fantasy Grounds, OGL, SRD stuff, you're probably all right. You start adding Forgotten Realms and proprietary IP and all that stuff, it's got to go on the DMs Guild. There's not a whole lot of room for flexibility there. And some publishers don't have the same agreements as Wizards of the Coast. So if you're going to do stuff for Free League or in my case, Cyberpunk, if I wanted to put out a Cyberpunk adventure, I can only do it for free. I can't monetize it. I can put it on the Forge, but I can't monetize it. And I cannot mention any direct names and that sort of thing. So there's pretty flexible as far as community content goes, but there are some guidelines. Basically, you can't make money from it, and you got to be kind of careful at what you refer to. They'll let you use some stuff. You gotta check with each publisher. You got to check with Fantasy Grounds. There's all kinds of regulations and rules. So this is a really important piece. So if you're going to do an official conversion, or you want to kind of know how they do it, there you go. So this is the developer guide product guidelines. And this is on the portal for the Atlassian. So if you go to this all content button here, you go to the developer guide and you go to the product guidelines, that's where you're going to find that. And then each rule set has their own instructions and that sort of thing. But in general, this is where you want to start when you're going to make content. And whether you're doing it for yourself or not, I would use this as a guideline. It doesn't have to be exact or perfect, but it gives you an idea. And this is a kind of a balanced way of doing things. There's a lot of people out there that want super high quality stuff. That's fine if you're doing it locally. But when you start putting the stuff on the store, sharing it with other tables that don't have good internet, that's when you start running into issues. Or someone has an old computer use your wife's laptop from 2017. Those sort of things can cause issues. So this is a kind of a consideration of what you're going to be building and how you're going to do it and the tools that are available to you. So there are other things that you'll be doing in Fantasy Grounds, like editing images, editing text, reformatting, that sort of thing. So one of the tools that I've used in the past that's a little bit more robust is if you're going to work with a PDF, you can use the RP Tools token tool. And it's a little bit more fancy because you can put these nice little custom borders, and it has a way to name the tokens. So all the tokens will have appended names on them, and there's all kinds of really cool features of this particular app. It's a little bit more robust. It's Java based. I think it's good if you're going to be doing a more of a professional build. And then most of us will use this token stamp. So if you need to make a few quick things, this is a good way to do that. And the download, when you download these, is at 256 by 256, the dimensions. So that fits in with the developer guide, because one of the recommendations is that for small to medium creatures, you use 256 by 256 resolution. However, it doesn't support this 512 by 512, which are larger or huge. So these might be something that you're going to have to do somewhere else. But if you're just going to do basic like character tokens, this token stamp does pretty good for that. It's okay to make it in here and then blow it up, but just remember the quality might differ depending on how big your token's going to be. So those are just two tools for dealing with tokens. Also for text, you got to find a program that's going to work for you. So in this case, I use Notepad++. It's free. All the resources I'm showing you are free, by the way, at least for the most part. If you use Photoshop or whatever, that's up to you if you're familiar with that. But if you're just starting out and you're not sure about any of this, there's a lot of free tools that are available, and I'll have those in the link after. But essentially use this tool for formatting and for editing text. And the reason you use a real text editor and not something like Word is it doesn't have a lot of the tools that strips out extra HTML, extra spaces, those sort of things. It's better to use a bona fide text editor. So you can it'll count the spaces in between words. There's utilities for looking up. It's just a little bit more superior than just using a standard word editor. Also, when you work with sources like PDFs and websites, if you're going to take information from there, when you go to paste it in here, it's not the same. So I'll give you an example. I'm going to bring up a blank here. And I'm going to go to, here's this PDF, okay? So when I go to copy this text, it's all jacked up. So I'll show you what I'm saying. So if I go to convert, I'm going to go to this review, go to select, and now I'm going to highlight just this text right here. Oops. So I'm going to highlight the text. And by the way, I'm using Nitro PDF. So I'm not using Adobe, I'm using Nitro. It's around $100. I got it on sale though, so it was probably like $60 or something like that. But it works pretty good. It's comparable to Adobe. It's not as fancy, but it works really good. So I'm going to go ahead and hit copy text. And when you come into, onto your text editor, I'm going to hit Control V, and see what I'm saying? You got all this crap. So the formatting gets lost when you actually copy and paste. And this is the kind of stuff you're going to deal with sometimes from a website or sometimes from your PDF. Depends on how it was created. So one of the commands you can do is do Control A, which is going to select all, and then Control J, which strips out all the formatting. But as you can see, this is like one big, huge, long text thing. So there's some things that you're going to have to get used to with working with text. So I'm just saying that you're just going to have to get used to the tools, how they behave. We're going to use this tool throughout the conversion process. maybe we can get into some of those things. You can make macros to help you run certain things. So like if you want it to remove double spaces and that sort of thing. So this is kind of just an overview of the tools that you might be using. The other thing I use quite often is I'll use GIMP. So GIMP is a free program. It's kind of like Photoshop, not quite as professional, but I wouldn't say any less powerful because it actually has some pretty good functionality to it. But generally speaking, I will use this for images. So I have another plugin that's called Batch Image. Yeah, yep. Linux users can use PDF to text. Yep. So batch image manipulation is one of the tools I use. So if you're going to do a multiple, let's say you want to do a convert to WebP in one pass, you have a manipulation set. You can resize, which I recommend you do that mathematically. Don't just do it. Also change format and compression. So let's say if your images are JPEGs or PNG and you want to do more than one at a time, this is good for this batch convert. So I'll change it to WebP. The website or the guide said 75% as far as image quality. And then you'll add your images or a folder of images, and then you can hit OK, and hit apply, and it'll convert them all at once. So it might take a minute or two depending on the size of them, but generally speaking, I use it for that, but also for removing backgrounds. So if you have something that you're trying to convert and you want it to take out the background of an image, you could do so. So you can take, for instance, you could take, let's see, if you wanted to use one of these or something, you could take that. So I'll just kind of use this. Maybe I'll just use this image as an example. So some of the things you can do with this is, I'll bring this in here. So a lot of times, maybe you just want a certain part of this. Maybe it's, an image. Maybe you just want this part. Depends on what you do. But if you go to image and go to layer and go to transparency, you add an alpha channel, which is going to allow you to select a layer of color so that you can remove it. So now that I have the alpha layer applied, I'm going to use a fuzzy select tool. And let's say I want to get rid of this brown stuff here. So it highlights this area. I hit delete, and that'll get rid of this, this color in here. So this is a way to remove some of that background image or the colors or whatever you need to do. And you can turn your images into transparency. So that's why I use this tool too, is not just for converting images, but also for removing there's other programs out there that'll do this too, but this is just a free program. So this is just kind of an idea of kind of what the use cases are in some of these, and we'll do a little more of this as we go throughout the series, because there's going to be some images that we're going to have to edit or change or convert. So these are just some of the tools. So you got text editing, photo editing, you got tools to make tokens and such. So these are things that you're going to have to keep in mind and get used to if you're going to do a big project and you're not familiar with Fantasy Grounds yet. So these are just steps that you want to take. Now the next thing is I planned like what order I'm going to do this in. So there's a method to the madness here. So quite often the content that you're going to work on is going to have kind of a cascading effect as to what goes to what. So I'm going to go actually load up a module that we put together in Fantasy Grounds Academy. This was Matt Akire made this, but this is a DMs module that he put together. So what this is going to do is show you kind of this relationship between the data that is in a module and how you kind of want it to, basically how you want to attack your project. So let me go to images and let's see. So here are the data connections. So this is kind of the way I would process this type of information. So generally speaking, like items, you'd want to build those first and then parcels. So I'd probably build those build the first one and then build the parcels. Same thing with NPCs. I'd build those, and then the encounters, and then if you had any random encounters. You have quests, story, and maps. You have items, or excuse me, tables, NPCs. So build NPCs to build encounters, build items, build parcels. So it kind of helps to do it in that order because they link together, or one relies on the other. So in far as the order of operations go, over here on the right for this campaign data, I would probably start with NPCs and then do the encounters. Or I might do all the images and maps first. Those are probably a lot of work right there. That's a ton of work. Then also the items. So doing items is very tedious. It's not hard, but it is a lot of work if you've got a lot of items. Those are probably, and then you make your parcels. So those are probably my top 3 go-tos to get those out of the way. That's generally the hardest part. So items, NPCs, and your maps and images. That's all, a bulk of the work. That's like half the work. The rest of these, like tables, goes pretty quickly, especially if you use the table import tool. Some rule set support, or most of the core rule set support importing text. So that's pretty standard or nice to have. In this case, for D&D 5e, there's an NPC importer. That's really handy. That cuts down a lot of time. Quest items are easy to build. Stories are kind of migrating. So towards the end of the series, we are going to work with the actual, instead of building a lot of story entries, they're kind of moving over to the reference manual, and that's actually changing. So when we get that final release with the 2D maps and such, we're probably going to get the story entry thing. It's going to be a little different, and it's going to show the actual reference manual entries instead of having to go into modules and then go into the, your thing and then go into reference manual. This is now going to show in the story entry. So if you're in the test version, you'll know what I'm talking about. But essentially, we'll go into building the reference manual, and this is you go to Builder under modules, and you can start your own chapter. What I'm noticing is that a lot of the creators will cut out pieces of an adventure. So rather than trying to make everything in text, if it's a table and doesn't look good in Fantasy Grounds, they might cut a piece of the adventure out. Like, let's say you wanted to use this table right here. They might actually take this part here and make this an image and insert it somewhere in your images and in your reference manual, so it looks better, or it looks more like the original. So maybe instead of making a Fantasy Grounds table, an inline table, you might make an image and then actually build the rollable table for it. So those are just different things that you got to consider when you're doing these conversions. So essentially, that's pretty much what I have for this particular episode. We're not going to get too deep into any of that sort of like editing and that sort of thing until the next episode. So the next episode, I think I'm going to focus on NPCs because those take the most time, and that's going to take the most consideration and work. And then on top of that, if you don't have the tokens built and ready to go, then that would be something that you'll have to consider while you're doing your NPCs. So I think honestly, I would start with all the artwork if you have it all. Do your tokens, do your all your images, get those into Fantasy Grounds, and then start working them, because that's probably one of the things that people tend to do is they'll work on something, go, oh, I need an image, then they'll work on something, oh, I need another image. When you do that, that really adds up. It takes a lot of time. So if you have the images ready to go and in Fantasy Grounds, that really speeds things up. If you're constantly bouncing back and forth between editing images, doing things in Fantasy Grounds, going back to doing images, that's when it takes more time. So you want to try to be a little bit more efficient and productive if you can. Sometimes you don't know what you need, right? But that's why you do an outline, so you can kind of get an idea of the artwork you're going to need, what kind of tokens you're going to need, those sort of things. And that will really speed up your process. And it will make it so it's not so damn annoying, because it can get very frustrating. And like I said, do not update Fantasy Grounds if you're in the middle of a big project. I've seen people get burned by that. Normally, the updates don't impact it, but they can. we got an update coming up that's pretty big. So if you're in the middle of a campaign build or a big project, I would not update it unless you have a separate computer. Honestly, I wouldn't even take the risk. It would just frustrate me to no end. If I updated Fantasy Grounds and it broke half my work, I would not be happy. So I would wait until you get the project done. Yeah, backups are your friend, exactly. If you can swing it, use a whole separate computer. That way it doesn't mess with your games and vice versa. So anyways, you guys, take care. Again, this is episode 1, and we'll do one next Friday at the same time. And about roughly half an hour to an hour per episode, trying to keep it kind of down so it's not too crazy. But nonetheless, leave comments after. If you need something particularly gone over, let us know, and I'll try to include that in our list. But generally, we're going to go through encounters, images, items, NPCs, parcels, quests, all those things. So that's what this series is going to cover. But we can only do it per episode, otherwise it'll be just too long. I've tried to do a full conversion on a show. That's like 2 to 4 hours, depending on what it is, and longer.